Usually when we think about trying to see the truth of the situation, there's this underlying expectation of achieving some sort of ultimate clarity.
Right.
It's like taking off a pair of really horribly smudged glasses.
Yeah, you just wipe them clean.
Exactly. You wipe the lenses clean, put them back on, and suddenly, the blurry green blob in the distance has individual leaves and branches.
Mm-hmm.
And you just point at it and say, well, there it is. That's reality. I can finally see it.
Yeah, we really crave that revelation, I think.
We do.
There is this deep comfort in the idea that deception is just a layer of dirt. And if we just scrub hard enough, the unvarnished truth will be sitting right there waiting for us.
Right. But you step into the world of advanced ideology and social theory.
Oh, yeah.
And suddenly you realize those supposedly clean glasses are actually projecting a hologram.
Right. It's not what you thought at all.
No. The landscape of belief and reality that we navigate every day is completely upside down. The distortion isn't hiding the reality.
The distortion is the reality.
Exactly. It is the absolute definition of an ideological house of mirrors. And figuring out how those mirrors are angled is, well, it's one of the most difficult intellectual exercises you can undertake.
It's incredibly dense stuff.
Which brings us to today, because that house of mirrors is exactly what we are walking into for this deep dive.
We are definitely jumping into the deep end today.
We really are. Our mission is uniquely ambitious this time. We are unpacking Slavoj Žižek's groundbreaking 1989 book, The Sublime Object of Ideology.
It's such a massive text.
It is. And to do this, we are pulling from a fantastic stack of sources. We have academic reviews by Jonathan Elmer and Michael Moriarty.
Both great pieces.
Yeah, and Raphael Winkler's incredibly comprehensive reader's guide. Plus, we have Žižek's own 2008 preface to the book, which has the unforgettable title, The Idea's Constipation.
I mean, only Žižek could get away with a title like that for a dense philosophical text.
I know, right? It really sets the tone.
It does. It tells you immediately that he's not doing traditional academia.
Right. So our goal here is to decode his massive paradigm-shifting synthesis. He basically takes Marxist ideology critique, Hegelian dialectics, and Lacanian psychoanalysis.
And just smashes them all together.
Yes, fuses them together. And we want to extract the core insights about how society, belief, and desire actually function.
Because it sounds like dense academic theory on paper,
Yeah.
but it actually explains our everyday reality, like from the physical money in our pockets to the deeply cynical political attitudes we see on the news every night.
Absolutely. So to really understand why this book hit the academic and political world like a thunderbolt, we have to look at the exact moment it was published.
Right. Context is everything here.
Exactly. So the year is 1989.
The Berlin Wall is fallen.
Yeah, Soviet Marxism is collapsing in real time. The entire geopolitical map is being rewritten.
The real-world stakes are just incredibly high.
So what is happening in the intellectual world while all these literal walls are coming down?
Well, the academic landscape at the time was essentially deadlocked. It was this massive debate between two towering figures, basically Jürgen Habermas and Michel Foucault.
Okay, I know Foucault is famous for his theories on power.
Right.
But can you map out that specific debate for us? Like, what were they actually arguing over?
Sure. So on one side, you have Habermas. He is championing the Enlightenment project.
Okay.
He believed in something called communicative rationality.
Communicative rationality. What is that exactly?
Essentially, it's this hopeful idea that through open, rational discourse, human beings can eventually reach a consensus. Like, we can strip away all our ideological biases and build a free, transparent society.
Oh, I see. So Habermas is the guy offering the clean glasses.
Yes.
He thinks we can eventually see clearly if we just talk it out rationally.
Precisely. And then Foucault steps in to say that this is a dangerous fantasy.
Because of power.
Exactly. For Foucault, power isn't just something a king wields over a peasant. Power is everywhere. It is woven into our disciplinary institutions, our schools, our hospitals, our very language. He argues there is no purely rational, neutral ground to stand on.
Because reason itself is shaped by power dynamics.
Exactly. You can never step outside of power to have a perfectly objective conversation.
Man, that feels like an intellectual gridlock.
Yeah.
You either believe in this utopian ideal of pure reason, or you believe we are just endlessly trapped in a web of power relations.
It was a huge deadlock.
So how does Žižek respond to this when he publishes the book?
He essentially walks into the room and bypasses the entire debate.
He just ignores it.
Pretty much. He insists that both Habermas and Foucault are missing the fundamental mechanism of how human beings operate.
Wow.
Yeah. Žižek argues that the very idea that we could ever reach a post-ideological age, a perfectly rational society free from ideology,
Yeah.
that idea is itself the ultimate ideological illusion.
Ah. So just thinking we could escape ideology is the ideology.
Exactly. To prove this, he draws a completely new axis. He pulls heavily from the Marxist philosopher Louis Althusser and the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan.
Let's break down that cast of influences.
Yeah.
Because it's a very specific, almost weird cocktail of thinkers. What is he taking from the Marxist side of things?
Well, from Marx himself, Žižek takes the critique of commodity fetishism.
Okay, remind me how that works.
It's this phenomenon where we treat objects like money or products as if they have magical inherent value. We totally forget that they are actually the product of human labor and social relations.
Right, like treating a gold coin like it's inherently precious rather than just a rock we all agreed to care about.
Exactly. Then, from Louis Althusser, he takes a crucial update to how ideology works.
Okay.
Althusser argued that ideology isn't just a set of false beliefs floating in your head, it is a material practice.
It exists in the rituals you perform. Althusser had this concept called interpolation, right? I always found that fascinating when reading the sources.
Yes, interpolation is how society basically hails you.
Hails you, like a cab.
Kind of. The classic example is a police officer yelling, "Hey, you there."
Oh, right.
The moment you turn around in response to that shout, you have recognized yourself as the subject that authority is addressing.
Wow.
Yeah, you are pulled into the ideological structure simply by participating in the material act of responding.
So ideology is something we do, not just something we think.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So that covers the Marxist side.
Right.
But then Žižek brings in the psychological side with Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan.
This is where it gets really deep.
Yeah, this is where we get into the unconscious and the symptom. But before we go further, we really have to define Lacan's famous triad.
We definitely do.
Because the sources mention it constantly. It's the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. How do we conceptualize those three realms?
This triad is the absolute engine of Žižek's analysis. So let's start with the imaginary.
Okay.
Think of this as the realm of images, illusions, and how we picture ourselves. It is where our ego lives.
Like when you look in a mirror.
Literally, yes. Lacan called it the mirror stage. When you look in a mirror and see a unified, complete version of yourself, you are in the imaginary. It lends a sense of wholeness that is ultimately a bit of a mirage.
Okay, so the imaginary is the cohesive picture we like to have of ourselves in the world. Makes sense. What about the symbolic?
The symbolic is the network of language, laws, customs, and social structures that we are born into.
It's as the invisible rule book of society.
Exactly. You don't invent English grammar, right?
Right.
And you don't invent the concept of a marriage or a legal contract. Those pre-exist you.
Yeah, they're just there waiting for us.
When you learn to speak and interact with others, you are entering the symbolic order. It is what gives our world structure and meaning.
Okay, so that leaves the real. And from what I understand from the sources,
Yeah.
the real is not what we mean when we say the real world in everyday conversation.
Far from it. In Lacanian terms, the real is the impossible, traumatic core of existence that completely resists being put into words.
It can't be spoken.
It cannot be captured by the symbolic network at all, and it shatters the wholeness of the imaginary.
So what is it, practically?
It is the raw, chaotic, traumatic stuff of life that doesn't make sense, like death, pure trauma, profound antagonism.
Yeah.
The real is the glitch in the matrix that proves the system isn't perfect.
Wow. So if the symbolic is the safety net of language and rules, the real is the terrifying abyss underneath it.
Beautifully put, yes.
And then there's the final piece of Žižek's puzzle, his highly unorthodox reading of Hegel.
Hegel, yes.
Historically, Hegel is taught as this ultimate idealist, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guy who believed that history is just the unfolding of human reason, magically resolving all contradictions into a neat, harmonious totality.
The classic thesis meets antithesis.
Yeah, and they blend into a happy synthesis. That's what you get in Intro to Philosophy.
Yes, the textbook version, but Žižek completely rejects that.
How so?
He reads Hegel backward, essentially, through the lens of Lacan's psychoanalysis. So he views Hegel not as a thinker of perfect wholeness, but as a thinker of radical loss, of fundamental incompleteness, and of inherent, unavoidable antagonism.
So for Žižek, Hegel recognized that the system can never be closed.
Exactly. There's always a gap.
I have to pause here and just look at this from a bird's eye view. Because in 1989, this theoretical recipe seems almost absurd.
It really does.
I mean, Marxism is politically collapsing as the Soviet bloc crumbles. Psychoanalysis is increasingly viewed as an outdated clinical practice compared to, modern psychiatry.
Right.
And Hegelian dialectics is notoriously opaque and deeply unfashionable. So why try to build a revolutionary new social theory by combining three completely sinking ships?
It seems so counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It really does.
Žižek actually addresses this head-on in his 2008 preface. He compares his project to a Copernican revolution in theory.
Okay, how does that analogy work?
Well, think about astronomy before Copernicus. The prevailing theory was that the Earth was the center of the universe. And when astronomical observations stopped matching that theory, scientists didn't immediately throw the model out. Instead, they tried to Ptolemize it.
Ptolemize it, meaning they tried to patch it up.
Exactly. They added incredibly complex minor tweaks. They called them epicycles. And this was to explain why the planets were moving in weird looping patterns. They were desperately trying to save a fundamentally flawed paradigm by making it more and more convoluted.
Oh, I see. So the Habermas and Foucault debate was essentially just adding epicycles to a failing theory of how society works.
That is Žižek's exact argument. A true Copernican revolution means you don't just add complications to save the old model.
You radically shift the foundational framework itself.
You put the sun at the center. Žižek argues that when a theory is in terminal crisis, the correct move is not to make safe incremental adjustments.
You have to embrace the worst options.
Yes. You have to embrace the absolute worst, most discredited options to force a complete theoretical rebirth. By smashing together unfashionable psychoanalysis and outdated Hegelian philosophy, he blows up the old Marxist framework.
And forces us to look at the mechanics of ideology in a totally unprecedented way. He didn't just change the tires on the car.
Yeah.
He decided to build a completely different engine using parts nobody else wanted.
That's a great way to put it.
Which brings us to the title of the book, The Sublime Object of Ideology. We really need to clarify what he means by sublime here.
Yes, we do.
Because in casual conversation, we use that word to describe like a really good slice of cake or a beautiful piece of music.
Right. But in philosophy, the sublime has a very specific lineage. To grasp Žižek's use of it, we have to look at how Immanuel Kant defined it first.
Okay, let's start with Kant. How did he see the sublime?
For Kant, the sublime is an empirical object of overwhelming, terrifying scale.
Okay, like what?
Imagine standing at the very edge of the Grand Canyon or watching a Category 5 hurricane approach.
Right, something massive.
The sheer magnitude of it completely overwhelms your sensory limits. You feel tiny and powerless.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, Kant argues that the very fact that your human mind can still comprehend the concept of this massive thing points to something transcendent. It proves that human reason belongs to a higher, supersensible realm. The physical object is huge, but it points upward to an even greater idea.
Okay, so the Kantian sublime is a massive earthly thing that serves as a signpost pointing to a higher transcendent truth.
Exactly.
So how do Hegel and Lacan flip that? Because obviously Žižek doesn't use the Kantian version.
No, they turn it completely inside out. For them, the sublime object isn't pointing to a higher transcendent realm at all.
What is it doing then?
It is a completely ordinary, everyday object that has been mysteriously elevated to fill an empty void in our symbolic order.
Elevated to fill a void.
Yes. Its positive, physical body is literally embodying nothing. It is a placeholder for a fundamental lack in our reality.
That is a staggering concept. An object whose only function is to give physical shape to a void.
It's hard to wrap your head around at first.
It is, but the sources bring up a brilliant visual metaphor for this from Federico Fellini's film Roma.
Oh, it is the perfect illustration for this concept.
Yeah, so in the film, a crew of subway workers is digging a new tunnel deep beneath Rome.
Right.
And they unexpectedly break through a rock wall and uncover this ancient, perfectly preserved Roman villa.
Mm-hmm.
And the walls are covered in these breathtaking, pristine frescoes. But the second the open air of the present day rushes into the sealed room, the frescoes react to the atmosphere.
They just start fading.
They begin to fade and dissipate, literally crumbling right before the workers' eyes until there was nothing left but bare rock.
Because the beauty and the power of those frescoes could only exist in that sealed-off subterranean environment.
Exactly. The sublime object can only exist in an intermediate half-seen state.
Right.
If you pull it into the harsh light of everyday reality and look too closely at it, it dissolves into nothing. It loses its magical aura. It only functions when viewed from a specific slanted perspective.
And this is exactly how ideology works.
How so?
The ideological object, whether it's the concept of the nation or the belief in the free market, it cannot withstand direct objective scrutiny.
Oh, I see.
If you examine it too closely, its inconsistencies become obvious and it falls apart. It requires a specific subjective viewpoint to maintain its sublime status.
Wow. Okay, let's follow that logic into how Žižek fundamentally redefines Marxist theory.
Let's do it.
He kicks off his argument in the first chapter by making a massive claim. He basically asks, how did Marx invent the symptom?
Yeah.
He is essentially saying that Karl Marx anticipated Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic breakthroughs decades before Freud even published his work. How on earth does he make that connection?
It relies on understanding how Freud analyzed dreams. When a patient brought a dream to Freud, Freud didn't just care about the latent content, the secret, hidden desire buried in the unconscious.
Right. He didn't just want to know what the dream meant.
Exactly. He cared immensely about the dream work. He wanted to know why that specific secret desire chose to disguise itself in that specific, bizarre dream imagery.
The form of the dream was just as important as the hidden message.
Yes. And Žižek argues that Marx did the exact same thing when he analyzed the commodity form in capitalism.
Okay, break that down for me.
So classical economists were obsessed with finding the hidden true value behind a product, which Marx identified as human labor.
Right.
But Marx went a step further. He asked the crucial question, why does this human labor take the form of a commodity in the first place?
Why does it become a product to be bought and sold?
Right. Why does the social relation between working people disguise itself as a relation between things?
Oh. So the form itself is the symptom. The fact that human effort is transformed into a shiny object on a shelf is the pathology of capitalism.
You nailed it.
And this leads to Žižek's analysis of money as the ultimate sublime object.
It really is.
He points out that money possesses a body within the body. We treat a dollar bill or a gold coin as if it is immutable and indestructible.
Even though we know perfectly well that paper tears and metal melts.
Exactly. We bestow it with a magical property. Its power isn't in its physical material. Its power is sustained entirely by the symbolic order we discussed earlier.
And this brings in a theorist named Alfred Sohn-Rethel. He has this concept of real abstraction.
Oh man, when I first read this in the sources, it broke my brain a little bit.
It's a trip.
We usually think of abstraction as something that happens entirely inside our heads. Like, I conceptualize the abstract idea of a triangle or the abstract idea of value, and then I apply it to the world.
Right.
But Sohn-Rethel says we have it backward.
He does. He argues that the abstraction doesn't happen in your mind. It happens in the material act of exchange itself.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Let's say you walk into a coffee shop. You might privately know that the piece of paper in your wallet is fundamentally worthless. You might be a complete cynic about the monetary system.
Totally. I know it's just paper.
But the moment you hand that piece of paper to the barista in exchange for a coffee, you are materially acting as if the money has intrinsic value.
Wow.
The abstraction, the belief in the money's value, is located in the physical action, not in your internal thought process.
Your body is performing the belief even if your brain rejects it.
Exactly.
There is a fantastic analogy from Žižek's preface about hyperinflation that illustrates how fragile this really is.
Oh, the hyperinflation example is great.
Yeah, so imagine you have a $100 bill sitting on your kitchen table. It holds value because of that massive, invisible, symbolic network of trust and exchange.
Right.
But suddenly, a catastrophic economic crisis hits. Hyperinflation spirals out of control. By the next morning, the entire financial system has collapsed.
What happens to the bill on the table?
Nothing physically happens to it. The paper hasn't changed. The ink is the same. Its empirical reality is completely untouched. But the sublime object of money has died overnight.
It has reverted to just being a meaningless scrap of paper.
Yes. It proves that the functional reality of that object depends entirely on the notional, symbolic structure holding it up. Without the network, the magic vanishes.
And this transition from the object to the actions of the subject is where Žižek makes his most famous contribution, I think.
Which is?
He moves from the symptom to what Lacan called the synpome. He explores the mechanics of belief, cynicism, and our strange attachments to these systems.
Okay, let's get into the cynicism part, because I think that's where this gets really relevant for today.
Right. So classical Marxism operated on a very specific definition of ideology, often summarized as false consciousness.
The classic formula. They don't know it, but they are doing it.
Exactly. The idea was that workers were being exploited, but they were blinded by the propaganda of the ruling class.
And the thought was, if you could just educate them, show them the truth, the ideological spell would break and revolution would immediately follow.
But look around at the modern world. Does that formula hold up?
Not at all.
Right. So Žižek brings in the philosopher Peter Sloterdijk to argue that it absolutely does not work that way anymore. Sloterdijk wrote about the rise of cynical reason.
Cynical reason.
He updated the formula for contemporary society too. They know very well what they're doing, but they do it anyway.
Wow. This is the defining psychological state of our time.
It really is.
We are surrounded by cynics. You can talk to someone at a bar, and they will eloquently explain to you exactly how the political system is rigged, how corporations are destroying the planet, how the media is manipulating them.
They see it all.
We have all the knowledge. The glasses are clean. There is no false consciousness blinding us.
Yet when Monday morning rolls around,
that same person gets up, goes to their corporate job, uses the money, and participates in the system exactly as if they didn't know it was fundamentally flawed.
The knowledge changes absolutely nothing about the behavior.
So the million-dollar question is, why do we do it anyway? Why do we keep acting out the script if we know the play is terrible?
To answer this, Žižek reaches back to the 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal.
Oh, Pascal's wager, that guy.
Yes, and specifically Pascal's concept of the automaton. Pascal was writing about religious faith, and he noted that people often struggle to intellectually convince themselves to believe in God.
Because reason gets in the way.
Exactly. So Pascal's advice was incredibly pragmatic and, frankly, quite unsettling. He basically said, stop trying to convince your rational mind.
What should you do instead?
He said, just kneel down, move your lips in prayer, perform the rituals, and the belief will naturally follow.
That is a complete inversion of how we assume human beings operate.
Totally backward.
We think the inner belief comes first. Like, I believe in God, therefore I will kneel and pray. But Pascal is saying, no, you kneel, you engage the physical automaton of your body, and the kneeling generates the inner belief.
It's all about the material practice, and Žižek maps this directly onto modern ideology.
How so?
The ideological apparatus doesn't care what you privately think in the shower.
Or what cynical jokes you make with your friends.
Exactly. It only cares about your material actions. As long as you perform the ritual, going to work, paying taxes, consuming goods, the ideological system is perfectly sustained.
So your external actions generate the unconscious belief that keeps the system running.
Yes.
Okay, I can accept that my actions sustain the system, but it still leaves a huge psychological mystery for me.
What's that?
If I know it's a rigged game, and I know I'm just performing a ritual, why don't I just stop kneeling? What is the glue that keeps me attached to a system I consciously despise?
This brings us to one of the most complex and fascinating concepts in Lacanian psychoanalysis. It's called jouissance.
Jouissance, which is usually translated as surplus enjoyment, right?
Yes, but we have to be very careful here, because jouissance is not simply fun or pleasure in the way we normally use those words.
Right, it's not the enjoyment of eating a good meal or watching a movie.
No. Jouissance is a paradoxical, painful pleasure. It is a pleasure found in displeasure.
That sounds intense.
It is. Žižek argues that human beings have a deeply perverse psychological structure. The very act of renouncing our natural, spontaneous pleasures in order to follow a strict, formal ideological rule produces a strange, unconscious satisfaction.
Can you give me an example of how that works in practice? Because it sounds so counterintuitive.
Think about the philosopher Immanuel Kant and his concept of the categorical imperative.
Remind me what that is.
It's the idea that you must do your duty simply because it is your duty, regardless of how much you suffer or how bad the consequences are.
Yeah.
Ideology always demands some form of sacrifice. It tells you to work 80 hours a week for the glory of the company or to sacrifice your life for the nation.
Right, there's always a cost.
Consciously, you might hate the grueling hours or the danger. But unconsciously, you derive a perverse thrill, a surplus enjoyment, from the act of submitting to the rule.
You get a kick out of your own martyrdom.
Exactly.
So the suffering itself becomes the reward.
Yeah.
That is incredibly dark.
It is dark.
But it explains so much about toxic work cultures or like extreme political fanaticism. The ideology doesn't just trap us with rules. It hooks us by providing this weird, painful satisfaction.
And this connects to how we make sense of our actions after the fact. The sources talk about this German term Nachträglichkeit.
Which means retroactivity, right? Or meaning arriving from the future.
Yes. Symptoms, or these strange actions we take, are often just meaningless traces when they happen in the present. They only receive their meaning retroactively through the act of interpretation later on.
Oh, it's like looking back at a random encounter you had 5 years ago. At the time, it meant nothing.
Right.
But if that person eventually became your spouse, you look back and label that initial meeting as destiny or the turning point. The meaning didn't exist in the moment. It was imposed backward in time from the future.
Exactly. And this concept of how things are structured and given meaning leads us into how our entire social reality is organized.
Okay.
Žižek asks a fundamental question, borrowing a phrase from Lacan. "Que veux?"
Which translates to, what do you want?
Or, more accurately, what does the other want from me? To understand how our reality is shaped, Žižek introduces the concept of the quilting point.
The point de capiton. I love the visual analogy for this one from the text.
It really helps clarify things.
Yeah, so imagine an old-fashioned mattress.
Yeah.
Inside, it is just a chaotic, loose mass of stuffing and feathers. If you just sewed a cover over it, it would be a lumpy mess.
Right, it would have no structure.
So to give the mattress a coherent, stable shape, you have to use a needle to pull tight threads through the fabric and anchor them with buttons.
Yes.
Those buttons are the quilting points. They stitch the chaos down into a structure.
That is exactly how ideology works on language and meaning. In society, we are swimming in a sea of floating, ambiguous ideas and signifiers.
So how do they ever become fixed into a coherent political worldview?
They require ideological buttons. Žižek calls these master signifiers.
These would be massive capitalized words like the nation, democracy, freedom, or communism.
Right. And what's fascinating is that these master signifiers are actually quite empty of specific content on their own.
Wait, empty? How can freedom be empty?
Well, what does freedom actually mean in a vacuum? Very little.
True.
But it acts as a gravitational center. The moment an ideology stitches the word freedom down as its master signifier, all the other floating concepts are suddenly defined in relation to it.
Oh, I see. Taxes become an infringement on freedom.
Yes.
Certain laws become protectors of freedom. The entire chaotic field of social life is suddenly organized around that one anchoring point.
The button creates the shape of the mattress.
That's brilliant. So if we construct these elaborate ideological structures to organize our world, what are we trying to defend ourselves against?
This is where Žižek draws on political theorists Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe.
Right, the concept of social antagonism.
Exactly. The core idea is that society is inherently split. It is fundamentally fractured by the Lacanian real.
This seems like a crucial point.
It is. There is a deep psychological longing in human beings for a perfectly harmonious, unified, friction-free society.
Of course, we all want peace.
But Laclau, Mouffe, and Žižek argue that this is structurally impossible. Society can never be a complete, closed whole. The antagonism is baked into the very foundation of human existence.
The idea that our social fabric is permanently torn is a terrifying, traumatic realization. We don't want to live with that anxiety.
No one does.
So what is our defense mechanism against that terror?
We use fantasy.
Fantasy. But here Žižek makes a critical distinction, right? Because fantasy isn't just about daydreaming or escaping reality.
Far from it. Fantasy is the very mechanism that constructs our reality in order to protect us from the trauma of the real.
It acts as a screen.
Yes, it covers up the fundamental impossibility of a harmonious society.
To explain the mechanics of this, Žižek analyzes a very provocative and horrifying historical example in the book.
He does, and it's important to look at structurally.
Right, he looks at how anti-Semitism functioned in Nazi Germany. And to be clear, we are examining this purely to understand the structural architecture of the ideology. How did the figure of the Jew function in the fascist fantasy?
Well, fascism is driven by an intense desire for an organic, harmonious, perfectly unified society, the ultimate closed system.
But as we just established, the real dictates that society is inherently split by class struggle, economic tension, and social antagonism.
Exactly. And the fascist ideology cannot admit that its dream of perfect harmony is structurally impossible.
Because if it admitted that, the ideology would collapse.
Right. So it has to invent a reason why the harmony isn't happening.
It invents an external intruder.
Yes. The ideology posits the Jew as the singular external reason why society isn't unified. It points to this fabricated scapegoat and says, look, society would be perfect and whole if only it weren't for this disruptive element.
Wow. So the fantasy masks the internal impossibility of the system by projecting all the blame onto an external figure.
It is a structurally brilliant, horrifyingly effective way to stitch an ideology together. It protects the illusion of the perfect society by giving the antagonism a face.
And this structural analysis explains a very frustrating modern phenomenon, doesn't it? Like why facts do not work against ideology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You could never defeat historical anti-Semitism by pointing out empirical, rational facts about Jewish people, because the Jew in anti-Semitic ideology is not based on empirical reality.
It's just a structural necessity for the fascist fantasy.
Yes. If you take away the scapegoat, the entire fantasy of a harmonious society shatters.
The ideologue will reject the facts to save the fantasy, because losing the fantasy means facing the trauma of the real.
That's exactly it.
So let's explore how this trauma intersects with our understanding of mortality and history. In Chapter 4, Žižek explores a fascinating distinction between two types of death.
Physical death and symbolic death.
Right, what's the difference?
Physical death is straightforward. It's as the biological end of the body. The heart stops beating. Symbolic death is entirely different. It is excommunication. It is the total loss of your place in the symbolic network, the social order.
So you can experience symbolic death while your physical body is still perfectly healthy and walking around.
Absolutely. Think of historical examples like being exiled from a city-state.
Or modern examples like being completely ostracized by your community, or facing total cancel culture where society fundamentally revokes your status as a recognized person.
Exactly. You are biologically alive but symbolically dead.
And it works in reverse, too. You can physically die, but remain symbolically alive. The sources bring up the historical political doctrine of the king's two bodies.
Yes, medieval political theology. They solved the problem of succession by claiming the king had two distinct bodies.
Okay, how did that work?
He had a natural physical body that could get sick, age, and eventually die.
Right.
But he also possessed a sublime symbolic body, the immortal body of the crown, the state itself.
So when the physical king died,
the symbolic body passed seamlessly to the next ruler. That is the exact meaning behind the phrase, "The king is dead, long live the king."
oh, I never thought about it like that. The biological body perishes, but the symbolic authority persists without interruption.
Exactly.
Žižek connects this idea of reaching across time to the philosopher Walter Benjamin, specifically his concept of Jetztzeit.
Which translates to now time.
Right. Benjamin had this radical view of history and revolution. He said that a true revolutionary moment isn't just about progressing forward into the future. It involves a tiger's leap into the past. What did he mean by that?
Well, we usually view history as a straight, linear march of progress.
Right, things just keep moving forward.
But Benjamin recognized that the past is littered with the wreckage of failed revolutions, crushed hopes, and forgotten victims. So a true revolutionary act in the present doesn't just ignore that wreckage. It reaches back and retroactively redeems those past failures.
It fulfills the unrealized potential of the past.
Yes. Once again, we see Žižek's obsession with meaning flowing backward from the future.
To really anchor this discussion of how the trauma of the real impacts our history, Žižek uses the sinking of the Titanic.
This is a great example.
He argues that the Titanic isn't just a sad historical maritime tragedy. In our cultural imagination, it functions as the thing.
It serves as a massive material leftover.
Right. It materializes that terrifying, impossible jouissance we talked about earlier. The Titanic represents the ultimate hubris of the industrial age. This supposedly unsinkable marvel of human engineering.
And it literally collides with the unstoppable, indifferent force of the real. Nature, the ice, death.
Yeah, the shipwreck sitting at the bottom of the ocean is a sublime object.
It fascinates us endlessly because it physically embodies that traumatic limit where human mastery completely fails.
It is the ultimate intrusion of the real into the symbolic order of the early 20th century. And grappling with that intrusion brings us to some of Žižek's most difficult but rewarding philosophical concepts in the final chapters. He leans heavily into Lacan's provocative thesis that there is no meta-language.
This is a big one.
Let's unpack this slowly because it sounds like a debate for linguistics professors, but it's actually about how deeply we are trapped in ideology. What does it mean to say there is no meta-language?
A meta-language would be a higher-level language used to objectively describe another language.
Okay, like standing outside a box to describe the box.
Exactly. In social theory, it implies the existence of an objective, neutral, outside position from which you can stand and analyze society perfectly.
And Lacan and Žižek are saying that this outside position does not exist.
It doesn't. You cannot step outside of ideology to comment on it neutrally.
Right.
Because the very words, concepts, and logic you use to make your critique are already saturated with the ideology you are trying to escape.
The sources explain this using a theatrical example involving the playwright Bertolt Brecht.
Ah, yes, the Brechtian actor.
Yeah, so imagine you are watching a play about the evils of capitalism, and an actor, playing a wealthy factory owner, suddenly stops the scene, walks to the front of the stage, looks directly at the audience, and announces, "I am capitalist, and I am going to exploit you now."
It's a classic distancing technique.
But Žižek points out why it fails, right?
Yes. The moment the actor attempts to step outside the narrative to comment on his own action from the supposed objective meta-language position, he ruins the reality of the exploitation.
You can't be inside the game and outside it at the exact same time.
Exactly. Every attempt to speak from a neutral, elevated position inevitably collapses back into the ideology itself.
You are always standing in the mud you're trying to describe.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, now here's where I have to admit I need help. Žižek dives incredibly deep into Hegel to explain how subjectivity is born out of this failure.
Yeah.
He focuses on something called the infinite judgment, and he quotes this deeply weird, jarring phrase from Hegel. Spirit is a bone.
Yes, it's a famous Hegelian phrase.
But generally, spirit means human consciousness, the soul, the spark of life. And a bone is the absolute opposite, right? It is the most dead, inert, material thing you can imagine. How does Hegel connect these two?
He doesn't connect them.
Wait, what?
That absolute failure to connect is the entire point. When Hegel says spirit is a bone, he is violently forcing together two completely incompatible concepts.
Okay.
It is an infinite judgment, because the gap between the two terms is infinite. They share no common ground. It is an impossible equation.
Why say it?
Because Žižek argues that this unbearable discord, this absolute failure of identity between spirit and bone, is the very definition of human subjectivity.
Failure is the definition.
Yes. We tend to think of the subject or the self as a solid, positive thing, like a soul or a brain.
Right.
Žižek says no. The subject is the void. The subject is the gap, the friction, the short circuit generated by that impossible contradiction. We only exist in the empty space where meaning fails.
That is mind-bending. The self isn't the battery. The self is the spark flying across the gap when the wire's short out.
I love that analogy, yes.
And speaking of how the self operates in the world, Žižek uses Hegel to critique a personality type called the beautiful soul.
Ah, the beautiful soul.
When I read the description of this in the sources, I immediately thought of modern internet culture, specifically the outrage cycle on social media.
It is a breathtakingly accurate diagnosis of modern online behavior.
Right, so the beautiful soul is a figure who constantly bemoans the wickedness, corruption, and depravity of the world.
They sit back in a posture of pure moral superiority and judge everything around them,
insisting that their own hands are completely clean. It is the person who constantly, quote, posts the daily outrage, positioning themselves as the pure, innocent observer who is just exhausted by how awful everyone else is.
Precisely. But what Hegel and Žižek point out is the massive ideological blind spot of the beautiful soul.
What are they missing?
They fail to realize that they are actively structuring their social reality specifically to play that role.
Oh, wow.
They need the world to be depraved so they can maintain their identity as the innocent, passive victim.
Their entire sense of self depends on the continued existence of the exact thing they're complaining about.
Yes.
If the world was suddenly fixed tomorrow, the beautiful soul would lose their identity completely.
Exactly. They don't see how their position of neutral judgment is deeply embedded in sustaining the very system they criticize.
It was the ultimate proof that there is no meta-language. The judge is always complicit in the crime.
Perfectly said.
Having mapped the architecture of this incredibly dense, wild book, we have to look at the fallout. What was the critical significance of the sublime object of ideology?
It was huge.
When he dropped this synthesis of Marx, Lacan, and Hegel onto the academic world in 1989, what was the actual reaction?
The impact was seismic. It essentially dismantled the two dominant paradigms we discussed at the beginning.
Right, Habermas and Foucault.
Yeah. It proved to the Habermas camp that we can never achieve an ideologically neutral, purely rational society because the real will always fracture it.
The glitch in the matrix will always be there.
But it also successfully pushed back against the pure post-structuralists like Foucault, who wanted to reduce everything to relativistic power games and language.
How did it do that?
Well, Žižek proved that the real, this traumatic, impossible kernel of antagonism, is a vital, necessary anchor for serious social analysis. You can't just reduce everything to discourse.
And its strengths are obvious when you look at its application today.
Yeah.
It is uniquely adept at explaining modern political cynicism, why we keep doing things we know are wrong.
Yeah, that Sloterdijk connection was brilliant.
And it successfully takes Lacanian clinical concepts, which were previously confined to the psychoanalyst's couch to treat individual neuroses, and weaponizes them into a high-powered microscope for Marxist political theory.
It was a very bold move.
But I have a major pushback here, and it's criticism I know many scholars have raised.
Oh, it's a theory that invites pushback. Let's hear it.
If ideology is literally inescapable, if there is no meta-language and it's baked into our material actions and the symbolic order itself, then how do we ever change anything?
The question of political action.
Right. The sources mention that Žižek only proposed way out is a concept called subjective destitution.
Yes.
From what I gather, this means completely stepping outside your symbolic mandate, dropping your ideological fantasy, and identifying directly with the meaningless void of the symptom. It sounds like a form of symbolic suicide.
It is essentially a total withdrawal from the symbolic network, yes.
But doesn't that lead to total political paralysis?
That is the big critique.
I mean, if every practical attempt to fix society just creates a new master signifier and a new ideological trap, then trying to organize a political revolution seems pointless.
Yeah, critics argue that the sublime object of ideology actually has a surprisingly conservative flavor in its practical implications.
Identifying with the void sounds less like a roadmap for political change and more like a recipe for clinical madness.
That is a very valid and prominent scholarly critique of the book. If radical political action is destined to just establish a new master signifier, then collective organizing seems futile compared to the individual psychological act of identifying with the symptom.
Are there other criticisms?
Yes. Furthermore, some Hegel scholars argue that Žižek violently oversimplifies Hegelian negativity. They say he forces it into a box just so it aligns perfectly with Lacan's concept of lack.
So it's not a perfect synthesis.
No, it is absolutely not a flawless system, and it deliberately refuses to offer a comforting, practical, political roadmap.
Despite those limitations, the reception was overwhelming. Right?
Oh, it is almost universally considered Žižek's masterpiece. It inaugurated a whole new era of cultural studies.
Over the decades, its analytical tools have deeply influenced film theory, political science, sociology, and even theology, from what I read.
Yeah. It proved that psychoanalysis still had absolute teeth as a tool for social critique, long after many academics had pronounced it dead.
And if listeners find this framework compelling, there are a few highly recommended related works that expand on these ideas.
Yes, I would strongly suggest reading Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffet's Hegemony and Socialist Strategy.
Okay, why that one?
That book is essential to fully grasp the theory of inherent social antagonism that Žižek builds upon.
Got it. Any others?
Additionally, Peter Sloterdijk's critique of cynical reason is a must-read for exploring that shift from classical false consciousness to the modern condition of cynical reason.
Fantastic recommendations. So, to synthesize all of this, why does a dense theoretical book from 1989 remain so vital today?
That's the big question.
I think it's because it serves as a massive warning label on our modern intellectual pride.
I agree.
It warns us that knowing better does not free us from ideology. You can be the smartest cynic in the room, armed with all the facts, totally aware of how corrupt the system is.
But as long as your material actions, the rituals you perform, and your unconscious jouissance remain tied to those structures, you are still trapped. It radically changes how we view our own agency.
How so?
We are not just innocent victims being lied to by a top-down authority. We are active, albeit unconscious, participants who sustain the illusion every day through our habits and our secret, perverse enjoyments.
True critique isn't just about unmasking the lies of the powerful. It's about confronting the traumatic, impossible kernel of our own desires.
Exactly.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought for everyone listening.
Oh, good.
It's derived from a classic Hegelian joke that Žižek highlights in the text. There is a Pole and a Jew riding together in a train compartment.
I love this one.
The Pole leans over and aggressively demands to know the secret of how Jewish people extract money from people.
Okay.
The Jew says, "I will tell you the secret, but it will cost you a coin."
Right.
The Pole eagerly pays him. The Jew leans in and whispers some absolute nonsense about burying a dead fish in a churchyard at midnight.
Total nonsense.
Yeah. The Pole looks suspicious and says, "Is that really the secret?"
And
The Jew says, "No, there is more, but the full secret costs 5 more coins."
oh boy.
This process repeats several times. The Pole pays more and more money, and the Jew keeps feeding him increasingly absurd nonsense.
Of course.
Finally, the Pole loses his temper, grabs the Jew, and shouts, "You rascal! There is no secret at all. You simply want to extract my last coin."
And the punchline.
To which the Jew replies, "Well, now you see how we do it."
It is brilliant. The Pole gets exactly the truth he paid for, just not in the hidden mystical form he expected.
The profound takeaway here is that the truth of society doesn't lie in hidden secret motives, buried deep within some shadowy conspiracy, or locked deep in our unconscious.
No, it doesn't.
The true, radical secret is fully visible, right on the surface of our everyday behavior. The act of searching for the secret is the secret. We just refuse to see it. Our actions are the truth.
It's right there in plain sight.
So as you go about your week, ask yourself, where in your own life is the secret hiding in plain sight? What if the glasses you're looking through aren't showing you the illusion, but are the illusion themselves?